Alleged Bible contradiction. Jesus is taken out into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan. And if you recall, he's tempted with three separate things: turn the stones into bread, throw yourself off the temple, and bow down to Satan for the kingdoms of the world. Why do Matthew and Luke put them in different orders? Let's get into it. As we've already mentioned, we have three temptations that Satan brings to Jesus. And we have no problems with the first one. In the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of Luke, it is, turn these stones into bread so that you can have some food. The problem sets in when we get to temptation number 2, because in the Gospel of Matthew, it is throw yourself off the pinnacle of the temple and let the angels catch you. And the third one is bow down and worship Satan for the kingdoms of the world. And these two are in the reverse order in the Gospel of Luke. So now the question is, why is that? Why are they in different orders? I think the answer can be found if we look at two different things in ancient thought. The first one can be how the ancients distinguished between qualitative and quantitative aspects of time. And the second has to do with how ancient biographers prioritize thematic and contextual considerations over chronological order. In his book, Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes, E. Randolph Richards says, Greeks commonly used chronos to describe the more quantitative aspects of time, such as chronology or sequence. Chronos times is what we might call clock or calendar time, discrete units of time that need to be measured relatively precisely. The ancients used kairos to refer to the more qualitative aspect of time, when something special happened. In order for us to get a clearer picture of the distinction between chronos and kairos, let's look at a few examples in the New Testament where these two different words are used. Let's first look at chronos. Matthew chapter 2 verse 7 says, Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and determined for them the exact time, chronos, that the star appeared. Notice how he's looking for a very specific time that the star appeared. In Acts chapter 7 verse 23 it says, But when he was approaching the age, chronos, of 40, it entered his mind to visit his countrymen, the sons of Israel. Again, he's talking about age, which is a very specific thing that happens whenever your birthday arrives. And finally, in 1 Peter, it says, If you address as the Father the one who impartially judges according to one's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time, chronos, of your stay on earth. And so this time he's referring to the amount of time that we have here on earth, which is obviously a set amount of time because God knows when we're going to be born and when we're going to pass away. Now let's look at kairos in the New Testament. Matthew 8:29 says, And they cried out, saying, What business do you have with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? Kairos. And this is obviously referring to the time, the special event, when Satan and death and all the demons will be defeated at the end of days. Mark 12:2 says, And at the harvest time, kairos, he sent a slave to the vine growers in order to receive his share of the produce of the vineyard from the vine growers. Notice how this is a particular kind of time, harvest time. There's not a specific day like March 31st or something like that where harvest is going to come, but rather it is when something specific happens. The harvest arrives. Luke 12:56, Jesus says, You hypocrites, you know how to analyze the appearance of the earth and the sky, but how is it that you do not know how to analyze this present time? Kairos. And obviously there he's not talking about how do you analyze this present day, Tuesday the 14th or whatever. He's saying, how do you not know how to analyze the time that we live in? Why do we need to take into account this distinction between chronos and kairos when trying to distinguish who was correct? In the ancient world, especially in ancient biographies, chronological order was not the highest priority. In fact, the gospel authors had thematic considerations as well as contextual considerations for the decisions that they made and the ordering that they provided for us. In the journal article, Luke's Distinctive Use of the Temple by Gregory Lanier, he says, The Gospel of Luke stands out among the synoptics in its prominent and generally positive use of the Jerusalem temple in framing the narrative. The Gospel begins and ends at the temple, and Jesus' ministry is developed by the writer in such a way that the temple continually comes to the forefront. And in the Gospel of Matthew, all of Jesus' major life events take place on a mountain, whether it be the Sermon on the Mount, the Transfiguration, or his crucifixion. So it makes sense for the climactic moment in Luke's Gospel to be at the temple, and in the Gospel of Matthew for his climactic event to be on top of the mountain. For modern Western readers, we expect things to be in correct chronological order for it to be considered an accurate retelling. This was simply not the case for ancient writers. If you were to ask Matthew and Luke who put their events in the correct order, they likely would tell you that they both did, based on their thematic decisions. Richards notes, the biblical authors were intentional about the sequence in which they presented events, even if they weren't preoccupied with historical, chronological order. We Westerners can focus so much on the time, the chronology, that we miss the timing, the kairos, the meaning of the sequence in a biblical passage. So our answer is this. Matthew and Luke are simply not focusing on the chronological order and the retelling of their events. They have thematic and contextual considerations they're taking into account in the making of their Gospels. For Luke, he's centering his Gospel around the temple, and in Matthew, all of Jesus' major events are happening on a mountain. So, next time you're reading the New Testament and you see a verse that refers to time, ask yourself this question. Is this referring to chronos or kairos? Don't be focused so much on the time that you miss the timing that the authors are trying to give you. Thanks so much for watching this video. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want more content like this. This has been The Epitome. I'm your host, Nathan Bozeman. We'll see you around.